I said his $1,200 ring was cheap and embarrassing. I asked him to take it back. So, he did. Subscribe for more stories. It really gets under my skin when wanting beautiful things automatically makes you a bad person in some people's eyes. Excuse me for having high standards. My name is Amber, I'm 24, and I truly thought I had my path figured out before my world was turned upside down by an engagement ring. I need to share my side because I'm so over being misunderstood. I had been dating Noah for nearly 2 years, not even the full 2, which in hindsight might have been a sign he was moving too fast. We connected at a house party through friends, and he felt different from other men I'd known. He had his life in order, with a job in healthcare that provided a good income and, it seemed, a lot of spare time. Some people have all the luck while the rest of us struggle through 40-hour workweeks. Noah also had this creative outlet. He crafted jewelry as a hobby. Initially, I found it charming, like a boyfriend who strums a guitar. He would present these little rings and bracelets he'd made, and I'd say, "Oh, how lovely, dear," while privately thinking they looked quite amateurish next to something from a proper jewelry store. But he took pride in it, so I was supportive. Noah always seemed to be trying a bit too hard to win everyone over. I believe it stemmed from his past. He'd been something of a ladies' man before we met. As a result, he was constantly overcompensating, trying to demonstrate that he was a new, devoted man. It was endearing, don't get me wrong, but at times it felt more like a performance than genuine behavior. When marriage entered our conversations, I was thrilled. At 24, many of my friends were already engaged or walking down the aisle. I began subtly showing him what I liked, a classic princess cut, white gold, something with substance but not overly ostentatious. I'd show him images on my phone as we scrolled social media, saying things like, "Look how gorgeous Lauren's ring is," or "That is exactly the style I adore." It was just typical girlfriend behavior. I'd poured hours into Pinterest, curating my ideas. I knew exactly what I wanted. Something that wasn't absurdly expensive, but clearly showed his commitment to our future. A ring I could display with pride, not embarrassment, when people asked to see it. What's so terrible about that? Noah appeared to be absorbing all my suggestions, and I sensed he was orchestrating something. He'd been acting cagey and anxious for weeks, and my imagination ran wild with proposal scenarios and wedding plans. I even began browsing for wedding gowns online, just to dream. His family seemed to adore me. His father, who lived abroad, worked with gemstones, and Noah often spoke of his dad's incredible talent for cutting stones. I thought it was wonderful to have that connection in the family, hoping it might lead to a good price on a ring. Looking back, I should have noticed certain things, like the strange expression Noah got when I remarked on other people's engagement rings, or how he'd steer the conversation elsewhere when I mentioned shopping for one together. I assumed he just wanted the proposal to be a total surprise, which I appreciated. I recall us passing a jewelry store at the mall once, and when I paused to admire the rings, Noah grew visibly restless, trying to pull me away toward the food court. At the time, I chalked it up to his secret plans. Now, I suspect he was already set on making the ring himself and didn't want me to get my heart set on a professionally made one. The weeks before he popped the question were electric. I knew it was coming. Noah was on edge, frequently taking mysterious calls in another room. My friends kept asking if a proposal was imminent, and while I tried to act nonchalant, I was practically bursting with anticipation. I'd visualize the moment, what he would say, how the ring would feel on my finger. I could picture myself calling my mother and then posting a photo to Facebook, watching the comments pour in about its beauty. I had already begun mentally selecting my bridesmaids and envisioning our wedding. Noah was working late often, which I figured was him taking extra shifts to save up for the ring. He'd come home with small cuts on his hand sometimes, and if I asked, he'd just blame it on his job. I supposed working in healthcare could be tough on the hands. The suspense was almost unbearable, but in the most wonderful way. Each time Noah proposed a special outing, I'd wonder if this was it. Every time he seemed unusually nervous. I thought today might be the day. I was buzzing with excitement for weeks. This is where it all began. Noah proposed a small get-together at my apartment with my family, my parents, my sister Riley, and a few other close relatives. It was simple, just pizza and drinks, but it felt significant because Noah wasn't one to organize events. He was a bundle of nerves that evening, barely touching his food and constantly checking his pocket as if to confirm something was still there. When he finally dropped to one knee in front of everyone, my heart literally skipped a beat. This was the moment I had dreamt of for so long. My mom instantly started to tear up, and my sister grabbed my dad's arm, whispering, "Oh my God, it's happening." He produced the ring box, and as he opened it, my first feeling was relief that it was really happening, followed by a genuine sense of wonder at its unique appearance. It was not at all what I had pictured, but it was beautiful in its own right. The design was an intricate leaf motif with what appeared to be garnets flanking a very well-sized diamond. It was unlike anything I had ever seen. Noah's hands trembled as he slipped it onto my finger. When he announced to the room that he had made it himself, the place erupted. My father peppered him with questions about how he'd acquired such a skill. My mother gushed about how incredibly romantic and personal it was. Riley was snapping photos from every conceivable angle. Everyone was utterly captivated. I have to say, it felt quite special to have a boyfriend who would go to such lengths. The remainder of the evening was a blur of joy. We celebrated, took countless pictures, and called his mother with the news. I couldn't stop gazing at my hand, adjusting to the new weight on my finger. It all felt surreal, exhilarating, and overwhelming. Noah looked so immensely proud and content, and seeing his joy made me joyful, too. We stayed awake late into the night, discussing our future, when we'd marry, where we'd live, the kind of wedding we wanted. It was one of those perfect nights where the future feels boundless and bright. I fell asleep that night twisting the ring on my finger, still in disbelief that it was real. Tomorrow, I would show it to my friends and begin the next chapter of my life. I was finally engaged. The next morning, I woke up still afloat on a cloud of excitement. I immediately checked my hand to confirm it hadn't been a dream. The ring sparkled in the morning sun streaming through the window, and I took a few moments to admire it, snapping photos to send to friends who couldn't be there. Noah was in the kitchen making breakfast, humming happily, still basking in the glow of the proposal. He kept coming in to kiss me and admire the ring on my finger, as if he, too, couldn't believe it was real. It was sweet to see him so pleased with his creation. However, as I examined the ring in the stark light of day, I began to see details I'd missed the night before. There were tiny imperfections in the metalwork, a few faint scratches on the band that must have occurred during its creation. The settings for the stones didn't seem as robust as those on a professionally crafted piece. It was still a lovely ring, but these small flaws began to bother me. I found myself mentally stacking it up against the rings of my friends. Lauren's ring from Tiffany & Company was perfectly finished. My cousin Chloe's ring was so polished and professional. This one was clearly handmade. And while that was meant to be romantic, it also meant it looked homemade. When Noah brought me coffee, I began to gently probe for details. How long had he been working on it? Where did he learn metalworking? How did he get my size right? His face lit up as he described the process, diving into technical details about his research, his practice pieces, and how his father had helped him source the garnets from abroad. He explained that it had taken him 3 months of sporadic work, learning new skills and coordinating with his dad overseas. Hearing it all laid out, it did sound profoundly thoughtful. Yet, I couldn't ignore a persistent unease. Then I moved on to the more practical inquiries. Was the diamond certified? Where was it from? What was the total cost of the materials? Noah seemed taken aback by these questions, as if it hadn't occurred to him that I would be concerned with such things. His tone became slightly defensive as he explained it was a lab-created diamond, not a natural one, but that they were chemically identical and indistinguishable. Except they are distinguishable, because one costs vastly more than the other. When I asked about the total expense and he mentioned it was around $1,200, I tried to maintain a neutral expression, but my mind was racing. $1,200 for an engagement ring. My friend Lauren's boyfriend had spent $8,000 on hers. My cousin's fiancé spent over $10,000. I know that sounds shallow, but it's not about the money itself. It's about what that money signifies. What is our relationship worth to him? What is our future worth? For a commitment meant to last a lifetime, shouldn't the investment reflect that? Noah kept highlighting the time and effort he'd invested, but time is not the same as a financial commitment. If anything, making it himself was likely the more economical route. He could have used those 3 months to work more at his actual job and saved enough to buy a beautiful ring from a real jeweler. I also began to consider the practicalities. What if the ring got damaged? Could any jeweler repair it, or would it require a specialist in handmade pieces? And what about insurance? How does one insure an item without a formal appraisal? Would it retain any value, or was its worth purely sentimental? The more I contemplated it, the more I realized my concerns were valid. But I knew I had to be delicate in how I raised them, given how proud Noah was of his work. The last thing I wanted was to hurt him or appear ungrateful. I spent the day trying to formulate the right words. I didn't want to come across as materialistic, but I couldn't dismiss these very real issues. This was an object I was supposed to wear for the rest of my life, a symbol of our love. Shouldn't it be exactly what I wanted? I decided to arm myself with facts first. I researched lab-created versus natural diamonds, read about their resale values, and compared prices at various jewelry stores. Everything I found confirmed my suspicions. Lab diamonds are substantially cheaper and do not appreciate in the same way natural diamonds do. I also priced out similar rings at actual jewelers. A ring with a comparable diamond and setting would easily cost 3 or 4 times what Noah had spent on the raw materials, and that didn't include the professional craftsmanship and warranty that come with a store-bought piece. By that evening, I was certain my concerns were justified. This wasn't about being superficial. It was about making a sound investment in our shared future. An engagement ring is something you might one day pass down, an asset that grows in value. What Noah had made, though sweet, was essentially worthless from a financial perspective. When Noah returned from work, I had my approach mapped out. I would be gentle yet firm, and hopefully, we could find a solution that satisfied us both. I waited until after dinner, when we were both relaxed. I brought up the ring casually, reiterating how much I loved the design and how everyone had been so impressed. Then, I carefully transitioned to my practical concerns: the lab diamond, the absence of certification, and the durability of the setting. Noah's entire demeanor shifted the moment I started. A defensive look washed over his face, and he began cutting me off to repeat how lab diamonds are identical to natural ones. He went on about ethical sourcing and environmental responsibility, completely missing my point. I tried to clarify that it wasn't about the science. It was about the investment, the value, and the fact that this ring was meant to be a potential family heirloom. But he only grew more defensive, acting as if I were attacking his creation rather than trying to have a mature discussion. The conversation quickly became heated. Noah seemed wounded and baffled, while I grew frustrated that he wasn't truly hearing me. I wasn't dismissing his love or his effort. I was simply being pragmatic about a significant life decision. I brought up past instances where I felt Noah hadn't quite grasped what I needed, like my last birthday when he gave me a thoughtful but inexpensive gift instead of the designer bag I'd been hinting at for months, or when he suggested a camping trip for our anniversary instead of the spa weekend I'd been dreaming of. It felt like a pattern of him not understanding what was important to me. Noah fell silent and said he needed some space to think. I could see he was hurt, but I felt I had been reasonable and honest. If we were to be married, we had to be capable of having these kinds of difficult conversations about money and priorities. The following days were incredibly tense. Noah was distant and withdrawn, speaking to me only about necessities like dinner plans or groceries. I started to feel he was being overly dramatic. All I had done was voice some legitimate concerns about the symbol of our future. I kept expecting him to come around, to see that I was just looking out for our best interests. Instead, he retreated further. He stopped mentioning wedding plans, lost his excitement about our engagement, and would barely even glance at me when I wore the ring. Finally, I knew I had to be more direct. I sat him down and told him frankly that I would prefer to exchange the ring for something with a natural diamond, perhaps from a real jewelry store that could provide proper certification and a warranty. I wasn't trying to crush his spirit. I was just being realistic about what I wanted to wear for the rest of my life. Noah became eerily quiet. He just stared at me for a long moment, and I watched something shift in his eyes. It wasn't anger, but something deeper, like profound disappointment or disbelief. When he finally spoke, his voice was different, chillingly cold. He said, "Fine," and held out his hand for the ring. Just like that. No debate, no attempt to understand my viewpoint, no effort to find a compromise. He took the ring from my hand and walked out, leaving me stunned and wondering what had just happened. I assumed he was just being sullen and would come around after he'd had time to process it rationally. We were planning to spend our lives together. Surely we could navigate one disagreement over a piece of jewelry. But the next day, Noah called me, and his tone was completely altered. It was cold and final, like he was speaking to a stranger. He said he had been thinking about our conversation and about our relationship as a whole, and he had concluded that I wasn't worth marrying. Those were his exact words, that I wasn't worth marrying. I was utterly floored. How did we get from engaged to him essentially calling me worthless after one discussion about a ring? I tried to defend myself, to make him see my perspective, but he cut me off, saying he didn't want to hear it. Then he hung up. Just like that, as if our entire relationship, the nearly 2 years we'd spent together, our shared plans, all of it meant nothing because I had concerns about a ring. I was devastated. I called him back repeatedly, but he wouldn't pick up. I sent texts trying to explain myself, but they went unanswered. It was as if he had erased me from his life overnight. My mother tried to call him to act as a mediator, and my sister, Riley, who had always had a good rapport with Noah, tried as well. He ignored all their calls. I couldn't fathom how someone could be so stubborn and petty. We'd had a single, honest disagreement, and his reaction was to detonate our entire relationship. It made me question if he had ever truly loved me, or if his ego was simply too fragile to withstand any form of criticism. The following weeks were a nightmare. I kept waiting for Noah to come to his senses and contact me, but he never did. I would see him around town sometimes, and he would act as if I were invisible, as if we had never dated, never been engaged, never planned a life together. My friends and family were mostly on my side, agreeing that Noah's reaction was extreme and that I had done nothing wrong. But a few people suggested I should have just been grateful for his gift, which infuriated me because they didn't grasp the full picture. I tried to move on. I went on a few dates, but it was hard not to compare every man to Noah. Despite the ending, we had a good relationship for most of those 2 years. I kept hoping he would realize his mistake and try to fix things. But months passed in radio silence. It was like Noah had moved on without a second thought, which hurt more than I care to admit. Then, about 8 months after we broke up, I saw things on social media that made my stomach clench. Noah had a new girlfriend, and she seemed to be completely enamored with his jewelry making. She was constantly posting pictures of pieces he'd made for her, praising his talent, and promoting his creations to her friends. At first, I told myself it was fine. We were over. But as I saw more posts, I noticed something that made me sick. His jewelry had improved dramatically. The pieces he was crafting for this new woman looked professional, polished, and valuable. I then discovered that his hobby had blossomed into a full-fledged business. He had an Instagram page with thousands of followers, a list of custom commissions, and his work was being sold in local boutiques. This new girlfriend was his biggest champion, helping him with marketing and photography, building his brand. His success was undeniable. He was commanding serious prices for his work, far more than the $1,200 he'd spent on my ring. Some of his custom engagement rings were selling for $5,000, $6,000, even $8,000, professional-grade pieces that belonged in high-end stores. But the real gut punch was their engagement announcement. Noah had proposed to her with another handmade ring, but this one was worlds apart from mine. It featured a massive natural diamond, a flawless setting, and impeccable craftsmanship. Even I had to concede it was breathtaking, exactly the kind of ring I had always dreamed of. The caption detailed how he designed it just for her, using the finest materials and incorporating elements that symbolized their love. The ring had clearly cost a fortune, likely 10 times what he had spent on mine. And she was gushing about how meaningful it was that he'd made it himself, how it represented his growth as an artist. I stared at those photos for a long time, awash in a mix of anger, regret, and some other emotion I couldn't identify. This was what Noah was capable of. This was the quality he could produce, the kind of investment he was willing to make, just not for me. Looking at that stunning ring, I realized that if I had been more patient and supportive of his artistic journey, perhaps I could have had something even better than I'd originally wanted. Noah had the talent. He just needed someone to believe in him. Instead, I had focused on what his work lacked rather than what it could become. I had measured his love in dollars instead of seeing the passion he was pouring into his craft. The irony was not lost on me. I had rejected his handmade ring for something more valuable, and now he was creating exactly that, just for someone else. But you know what? I still don't believe I was wrong to have standards, or that it was unreasonable to want what I wanted. The issue wasn't my desires. It was Noah's inability to handle feedback and his choice to discard our relationship rather than work through a problem. If he had been more mature, if he had truly listened to my concerns, maybe we could have found a solution. Perhaps he could have made me a new ring later, or we could have upgraded it down the line. Instead, he walked away from someone who loved him over a minor disagreement. Sure, he landed on his feet, but that doesn't excuse his disproportionate reaction. I'm doing fine now. I'm with someone new, and am probably better off without a partner who would abandon a relationship so easily. But sometimes I wonder what might have happened if I had been more encouraging, or if he had been more understanding. The whole ordeal taught me a lot about communication and what truly matters. But it also reinforced that having standards is not a character flaw, and neither is being honest about what you need from a partner. I just wish Noah had been mature enough to work with me instead of giving up on us so quickly. I guess some people find it easier to start over than to put in the work.